Okay, good morning, everybody say. I figure it's Erev Shavuos. We'll talk about a little of a Shavuos topic. The truth is that what I'm going to talk about today, though, is missing a halachic spine. It's not a nidin halacha b'chlal. It's not a particular controversy. I really want to talk about Dovid HaMelech a little bit, a few different nekudas about him. The Chida in his Sefer Simchas HaRegel, on his shtickle in Shavuos, on Megillas Rus, in his third shtickle, there's most of what I'm discussing is at least based or connected on that, connected to that, and I want to just discuss it a little bit. So the truth is, I want to start like this. There's a minig that's gebracht in all the poskim, and we all do it, that we read Megillas Rus on Shavuos. That's the minig. Now, it's a little bit mysterious why. What's really the connection between Rus and Shavuos? Why is Shavuos the time to read the Megillah of Rus? Now, the poskim bring down different things. It's gebracht from Mazayar, it's a Medrash Lekach Toiv. These are like the sources. And for the Tamei HaMinig, why it is, there's a lot of different sources that are brought down. Some of them are, Lamashal, I'll tell you, Lamashal, it's the Machzavitcher brings down as follows: Al Shem Shekasav Bei Betchilas K'tzir Sa'irim, Tachas Hatzera Shenikr Bikuri K'tzir Chitim. Like it's simple over there, that the setting of the stories during that time of the year, so we read it during this time of the year, when it's the time of the setting of it. Sefer HaManig brings down Hatam Sheshamati Lefi Shekasav Bei Vehema Bo Beislachem Betchilas K'tzir Sa'irim Zman HaKatzir. David Raham says B'chag HaShavuos Nagu Likri Rus Mipnei Shekasav Bei Betchilas K'tzir Sa'irim was Zman HaKatzir. Meaning, so you see in a lot of the Rishonim they're saying something very simplistic, like it's a Megillah that has to do with the Zman HaKatzir, so we talk about it now. David Raham brings a second reason, that it's a Zecher from Maimed Har Sinai. There's a lot of different, little reasons that are brought. Now, the truth is that one of the primary reasons, I think this is the one that, like most people, took to heart, is as follows. And the Chida brings this down in Simchas HaRegel, and others bring it down as well, is that Shavuos is, the way the Chida says it, Shavuos is the day that Dovid HaMelech was born. It's the birthday of Dovid HaMelech. And if it's the birthday of Dovid HaMelech, and Dovid HaMelech comes from Rus, he comes from Yenegerus, so Hayos, today's the birthday of David, Shavuos is going to be the birthday of David. We read Megillas Rus to be Miyachis David, like to where he comes from. This is what the Chida says, and he's not the first one to say it, and others say it, it's a similar thing. Now, what's interesting is, how do we know that this is the birthday of Rus? How do we know this is the birthday of Dovid HaMelech? Where does it say that this is the birthday of Dovid HaMelech? So the truth is, the Messiah is that Dovid HaMelech was nifter on Shavuos. It's the yard side of Shavuos. Now we know the Gemara in Kedushin says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yeshiv Mal Shneisav Shal Tzadikim. He sits and he's Memal, make sure it's Miyayim L'Yayim. So Mastama, if Dovid HaMelech was nifter on Shavuos, he was born on Shavuos, and maybe we read, Megillas Rus on Shavuos, which is the birthday and the yard side of Dovid HaMelech. That's what many of the Achronim, the Shari Tshuva brings it down, the Chida brings it down. Many of the Achronim seem to circle in on this reason. So I wanted to discuss Dovid HaMelech's birth and his death a little bit in that context. Meaning, he used to, the Achronim are bringing down that it's his birthday and his yahrzeit. So I wanted to discuss his birth and his death a little bit. And there's actually some interesting, Paris Hanoshim that come up from it. So now, a lot of this is Bakant Zachen, some isn't. We'll try to go through it a little bit. Now, Dovid HaMelech, we know, was, I'll read you actually, I'll just read you the way the Shari Tshuva brings down from the Bukhar Shar. The Bukhar Shar is in Baba Basra. The Bukhar Shar says like this. He says, Lefisha Dovid HaMelech, Olav Hashalom, Meis Ba'atzeres, V'akadosh Baruch Hu Memala Shneisav Shal Tzadikim, U'bevadei Ba'atzeres Noilud, Megillas Rus Nichtav L'Yachas David. He does the whole, all the Shlavim. It's the death, and therefore the birthday, and therefore we read Megillas Rus. That's the thing. Now, Dovid HaMelech, we know, was a big outsider. Dovid HaMelech was a big outsider, even amongst his family. And the story is as follows. First of all, the whole family had a major cloud on their yichus. The whole family of Yishai and all his children. Yishai had 7 very substantial sons, very chashuva children, and the whole family had a major cloud on its yichus. And the Gemara in Yivamis, the Fayin Vavam and Beis, discusses it. It's really in context of Dovid HaMelech, but I'll read you what the Gemara says. The Gemara says like this. It says as follows. Ucherois Shaul is David Yoitzel Ekras HaPlishti. This is fast forwarding into the, I think, let's call it the 28. I think David was 28 at this time, the 28th year of David's life. We're fast forwarding into, but it says Ucherois Shaul as David Yoitzel Ekras HaPlishti. Amar al Avner Saratzava. He said to Avner the general, Ben Miza Hanar Avner. Whose kid is this? Whose nar is this? So the Gemara says as follows: Hachi Kamar Shaul. This is what Shaul was saying. Imi Peretzasi, Imi Zerachas. Imi Peretzasi Malkahave. Amalei Doeg Edomi. So Doeg Edomi steps up and he says, Acha at the mashal of Hagan ul Malchus. Before you start declaring if this kid, this child, Dovid HaMelech, showing up on the battlefield is roy to be the king or not, Im lav shoyel love him roy love bekala alav. Why don't we first discuss his yichus? Let's discuss if he's a kosher to be a Jew b'chlal. My time, the Kasim Rusa Mayavia. He comes from Rusa Mayavia. That's his great grandmother. Amalei Avner Tanina. We learned Avner says already. There's already a brisa, whatever meaning. This is way before Mishnayos and brises. But Tanina is the lashon of brisa. There's already a brisa that says that Amayni v'lei me'avis. Elamiata mamzivlis. So frek doyeg elamiata mamzivlis mamzeres. So if you're going to tell me that there's exceptions always, it's only from the men, not from the women. So mamzer v'lei mamzeres. So ishtik, he was quiet. Miyad v'yemer HaMelech Shaul ata ben mizeh ha'olam. So Shaul repeats and he says, find out who this is. So the Gemara says, Hachi kamalei. This is what he was saying. Halachan esalm mimcha. Tzei v'shaul b'beis hamedrash. It's a nidin over here, meaning this is like in the army camp. You have to like picture the picture. They're camped out on two opposite sides of a valley, facing the Plishtim. Goliath, who's a giant and a terrifying figure, is lording over the valley and being mecharef from Megadef and cursing out the Jews and HaKadosh Baruch Hu every single day. And in the little, military headquarters, Tipi, Shaul and his top generals are sitting around a small table, and this boy, a small boy, orange hair, shows up on the battlefield to bring provisions for his brothers. He overhears a conversation of people discussing that if someone will step up and kill Goliath, that person will become the king's son-in-law. And he says, I could do it. And he comes and he's armed with he's dressed in a sheepskin clothing that he crafted for himself, a homemade sheepskin shirt with a little slingshot and no weapons and no armor, probably in sandals or no shoes at all. And he steps up, and this is the conversation that happens. Like you have to paint yourself the picture. This is the conversation. They say, what's going on over here? Who is this kid? What is this? And in there, the generals, who are also the big Talmid Chacham of the Dar, like the Gemara in Sanhedrin tells us, start debating his yichus. Is he kosher? Is he not kosher? Where does he stand? Until Shaul, who's the king, sees that there's lack of clarity over here, at the table, and he says, so go ask him in the Beis Medrash, meaning our little field discussion over here is not going to be enough to settle this question. Go ask him in the Beis Medrash. So Shaul, he goes to the Beis Medrash. Amrullah, they tell him, they validate this exception of Amayni v'lei amaynis me'aviv v'lei me'avis. So actually, Doeg kol hani kashiyaisa. So Doeg, who had been on team Shaul's and Mamzer, goes and asks, team David's and Mamzer goes and asks all his kashas on it. Ishtiku, they were quiet. So Bo lachruzi alei, they wanted to be machras that this is the wrong psak, and vice versa, that David's really not okay. The whole Beis Yishai, the whole family of Yishai is not acceptable. Miyad va'amasha ben ish ushmoi Yisraeli. Amar Rava Malamet shechagar charba ki Yishmael. He strapped on his sword like a Yishmaeli. V'amar kol mi she'ein shemei halacha zu yidaka b'cherev. Anybody who's not going to accept this halacha that Amayni v'lei me'avis, Mayavi v'lei me'avis, is the halacha, yidaka b'cherev. I'll stab him. This is a pretty rare occurrence in Midrash. Not so rare, but pretty rare. The Gemara by Shammai and Hill talks about it, but it's an exception when the sword comes out in the Midrash. And he says, "Kach mekublani mi beis dini shel Shmuel Aramasi, Amayni v'lei me'avi v'lei me'avis." This is the Gemara in Yavamis that talks about like the major cloud of the Yichus cloud that hung over the entire Beis Yishai, the whole family that David stammed from, and this is how it was settled. Now the Brisker Rav Grada in his Pirush and Rus has a beautiful vard in this Gemara, and it's just stam. He says an interesting thing. He says they brought a brisa, Amayni v'lei me'avis, Mayavi v'lei me'avis, which means they didn't have it as halacha mishmei Sinai. They had it as a psak. There was a brisa that came from a drasha, from the way they were doing it. Now when Doeg starts asking kashas, the halacha is that you could slug up a kavachemer, you could slug up a limud. So Doeg starts slugging it up. And when they realized they didn't have an answer to his questions, they were going to overturn the previous psak halacha. Meaning it was already gepaskint, there was a brisa. It said Tanina, we know there was a din already. They were going to slug it up and overturn it until Amasa came and he said, no, kach mekublanim beis shel Shmuel and shel Shmuel Ramasi, it's a kabbalah from halacha Moshe Sinai. Kach mekublani, it's a kabbalah. The Brisker Rav said, and they said halacha Moshe Sinai, then you can't argue on halacha Moshe Sinai. Meaning this was a very litigious conversation. They were arguing about the exact pratim of what is this halacha? Is this a drasha? Is it a halacha Moshe Sinai? Until they finally established that the yichus of this family is not so much in question anymore. Now, but David himself had an extra stain on his yichus. This is the whole family. David had an extra stain on his yichus because the Gemara tells us that's not a Gemara, but the Chazals and many Mepharshim bring it down, many Achronim, that Yishai, at a certain point, became aware or became very self-conscious about this cloud that hangs over the whole family. Amayni v'lei me'avis, Mayavi v'lei me'avis, it's not so clear. Are we kosher? Are we not kosher? Yishai himself, who the Gemara tells us is from the few who were Meisei Be'eti Shel Nachash, he's from the Daled that were Meisei Be'eti Shel Nachash, he did no Averis, he was concerned that perhaps my family is not really kosher. So after having 7 children, he decided to be Perish Me'ishtay, just like Moshe Rabbeinu did. He said, I'm not going to have any more children. Now, Me'ezat HaMshiach, a few years later, 3 years later, it's not like that, he decided that he wants to have a child, and he decided to marry his Shifcha, to be Matar his Zera. Meaning he'll marry a Shifcha, and then he'll be Meshacher her afterwards, and then the child that was born will be a slave, and he'll be Meshacher the child, and then the child will be kosher. That was the Eitzah that Yishai wanted to be. Now, this Shifcha was terribly not into this idea, and she told Yishai's wife, who David's mother, who Yishai had been separated for 3 years, and said, this is what Yishai is planning to do. We got to figure out how to beat the system over here. And she said, what should I do? He hasn't been with me in 3 years. He already separated from me for 3 years. He said, why don't you pretend to be me, dress up as me, and v'chulu v'chulu. 9 months later, David HaMelech is born, and the entire family, Yishai and all the sons were already grown-ups, meaning because this was a big break in the family. The adult children of Yishai say, Vaista, she's Hara Leznunim, she's not, Hara Lezunim, it's a problem. And this David is some sort of, some sort of like not. Now, the Chazal tell us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made it so that David looked exactly like Yishai. Yishai had orange hair, which is, we don't know too many people the color of their hair, but Yishai had orange hair and David HaMelech had orange hair. They say the name of the HaMelech had orange hair. They say the Goyin had orange hair. There's a few different people who are known to have had orange hair, but David HaMelech is born looking like Yishai. But Afal Pikin, the pasuk in Tehillim tells us, Muzar ha'isi la'achi v'nachri l'bnei imi. I was considered a muzar, like a zar, like a mamzer. My brothers didn't consider me to be from the family, and afilu my mother's side didn't consider me to be from the family, because what happened there? How did this happen? And David HaMelech was his own very clouded yichus. Now, until he was 28 years old, David HaMelech was a shepherd. The pasuk tells us v'nasnu b'tzayin. Now, we have some sort of like romantic idea of a shepherd. All of Klal Yisrael's great leaders were shepherds, and there are chazals and midrashim that are mashma like that. But there's also chazal fakert. L'mashal, the chazal by David HaMelech tells us, the Medrash tells us, there's no more shvelistic a job than being a shepherd. They sent him to be the shepherd, else you're not really part of the family. It wasn't because they saw leadership skills in him and they saw him to be, the Ediyah L'Gdula and the future leader of Klal Yisrael. They sent him to be a shepherd because you're the loser of the family. You barely belong to this family. They sent him to be the shepherd. And chazal tell us, and the Achronim, it's all a blend. I'm not going to bring a source for everything, but everything has, I didn't make up any of it. It said that David HaMelech himself internalized this message, and he believed that he was not, that he was a mamzer. He wasn't Roy Lekach. He didn't know. His mother never told him. He believed that he was not, Roy Lekach, and as is the way of a shepherd who's out in the field, he was attacked by wild animals, and we know from the Tehillim, David HaMelech says, Gamas Ariva Sadev Hika Avdecha. David HaMelech was able to tear apart a lion and a bear from their mouth, and the Medrash tells us, what did he say? Yeah. And what did he say? It's passing Shmuel, yeah. And the Medrash tells us that he grabbed the lion by its beard, by the mane, and ripped its mouth apart like a gdi, like a goat. Like he tore it apart. And David HaMelech made himself this jacket that I described that he was wearing out of the skins of these wild animals that he killed as a mascaras that Hashem saved him. And then it dawned on David that maybe I am worthy. Maybe I am Roy. If Hashem is giving me this superhuman strength and allowing me to save myself from all these vicious attacks that are going on, maybe I am Roy. And David began to, in his own mind, believe that it could be he is Roy. Now, when Shmuel Hanavi is sent by Hashem to appoint the second king for Klal Yisrael after Shaul, so Hashem tells him, he says, Malei karnachach shemen v'lech hashalechecha al yishai besalachmi kirisi b'banav limelech. Hashem tells him, fill up your entire jug of shemen, which Chazal learned from there, that fill up meaning this is a Mashiach that's going to be l'deri deris. David u'mishpachtai, Beis Yishai u'mishpachtai are going to be the kings, forever and ever. Mashiach's going to come from them. He says, he said, Malay karnach Hashem, and fill it up, meaning it should be enough to go for deri deris. And he goes to Yishai's house, and the Chazal tell us that he comes to Yishai, and he says, Yishai, Hashem didn't tell me who, but Hashem said one of your children is, worthy of being appointed the king. And Yishai's children are all substantial children, and the Midrashim tell us that Yishai presented them one at a time, and each one of them, Hashem was nimas in them. The Psukim tell us, the Midrashim tell us, Hashem didn't want any one of the children. And finally, David HaMelech, Yishai's done with the children, and Shmuel says, Hatamu, we're done, there's no more? And Yishai says, yeah, Tamu, my children are done. Now think about what that means. That means Yishai is very aware that he has another son out in the field somewhere. It was to that level, he didn't consider him to be Roy and his son, that when Shmuel comes with the nevuah from HaKadosh Baruch Hu and said, one of your children is going to be a king, and they already cycled through all 7 of Yishai's children, and David's out in the field, and Shmuel says, Tamu, is it done? Yishai says, yeah, Tamu, it's done. I don't have any more kids. I don't know. Give us a chayitza. Hashem told him, I don't know. It's gone. I mean, that's the level of thing. And on that, Dovid HaMelech says, Evan Maso Abaynim Haisel Rosh Pina, the stone that was, disgusted by the builders, was chosen. And Chazal described a few different versions of it, but the Gemara Pesachim says one. The Gemara Pesachim Daf Kufites says, Amar Shmuel Nachmani Rav Yechanan Oidcha Hashem Ki Anisani Amar David Evan Maso Abaynim Haisel Rosh Pina Amar Yishai Meis Hashem Haisel Zois Amar Achav Zayeh Mas Hashem Amar Shmuel. Meaning everyone standing there was blown away. Yishai, David, Shmuel, the brothers. Nobody was prepared for this. They were all surprised when it was David who was chosen to be the king. And when David arrives, then the Psukim tell us that the Shemen came out of the flask, and David is Nimshach to be the king. Now this is when David is 30 years old, I think, 30 years old. And then Dovid HaMelech, from there on, I wish I could tell you lived happily ever after, but far, far from it. David has one of the most eventful and interesting lives of anyone ever lived. Ad Kedei Kach that Kamat, the whole Sefer Shmuel, is about David's life, which is a tremendous amount of airtime. I don't know if there's anyone in Tanakh who has as much coverage of his life. And Dovid HaMelech lives through many, many ups and downs, trials and travails. First, as he's being chased by Shaul on the road, then eventually when he becomes the king, he's a warrior king, and at the same time he's a tremendous Talmud Chacham. The Gemara in Brachas tells us Dovid HaMelech didn't sleep more than 60 breaths, whatever that is. There's a grad the Be'er Halacha in Archaim, when he talks about Hilchos Netilas Yadayim, brings a bunch of different days. How much that is? The shortest amount, I think, ranges from a half hour to 2 or 3 hours, not longer than that, meaning it's the whole span of the Shita. So Dovid HaMelech never slept more than that. He slept like in the Gemara Brachas tells us, Kina ha'yitalu l'malam mitasa shel David, and when Chatzais would come, it would blow, David would wake up, Chatzais laila akam l'hoydis l'cha, David would get up and start davening already. And Dovid HaMelech is a warrior king, Ad Kedei Kach that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not allow him to build the Beis HaMikdash. He said, Yadecha damim malo, your hands are full of blood. But that refers to some of the missteps, and Dovid HaMelech's missteps are recounted in great detail. And the Gemara on Shabbos discusses if he did do an Aveira, if he didn't do an Aveira, was he Mekabel Lashon Hara, was he not? And there's tremendous amount of discussion in Dovid HaMelech's life. But we're going to fast forward through all that and try to get to his yahrzeit, because we're here to discuss his birth and his yahrzeit. So we discussed his birth and the cloud over his yichus and etc. Now let's fast forward to Dovid HaMelech's death, which is also a whole sugya. Now, that's as follows. The Gemara in Shabbos, on Daf Lamed Amud Aleph and Lamed Amud Beis, tells us pretty big arichos about the death of Dovid HaMelech. And it says like this. It says, Amrav, Ma'idachsiv Haydieni Hashem Kitzi, Umidas Yame Mahi, Eda Machadal Ani. Dovid HaMelech asks in triplicate to know when he's going to die. He asks 3 different ways to know when he's going to die. Amar David Lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Dovid HaMelech said in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ribono Shel Olam, Haydieni Hashem Kitzi. Hashem says, no, I don't tell anybody. That's the rules of the game. You don't know when it's time to die. So he says, I can't tell you that either. I can tell you what day you're dying. It's going to be on Shabbos. B'Shabbos Tammuz. So for David, Amos be'echad b'Shabbos. Let me die on Sunday. Why do I have to die on Shabbos? Now it's interesting. Rashi explains Amos be'echad b'Shabbos. Yochel esasik bi b'espedi. Interesting chat. Rashi says that Dovid HaMelech wanted, I don't want to be laying there like a corpse on the bed. Let them be able to be Isaac in me. It's already your son Shlomo's time by Sunday. I can't wait till Sunday. So Dovid HaMelech says, Amos be'erev Shabbos. I can fine, so let me die on Erev Shabbos. Hashem says, I'm not mavatar. I'm not mavatar on a single day of your avodah. It has to be Shabbos. So what did Dovid HaMelech do? And it was interesting. He had a very personal conversation with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He knew exactly when he was going to die, but he's not really accepting it. It says, Kol Yom Shabbat v'Yaseh v'Garis, Kulu Yuma. He would sit and learn the whole day, knowing that the Malach HaMavis couldn't touch him while he's sitting and learning. Hu Yuma, the day that it was supposed to be, the Boy Lemeinach Nafshe, that he was supposed to die. Come Malach HaMavis Kamei. Malach HaMavis stood in front of him. He couldn't get them because he was learning. Levi Pasik Pum Megirse. He wasn't stopping to learn. What should I do? Havale Bustana. He had a garden. Acheri Beisa. Asa Malach HaMavis Salak Ubachash Beilana. He made noise in the trees. So Nafik Lemechse. He went out to sea. Have a Salik Bedarga. Ifches Darga Mitoisei, one of the steps, broke up from underneath him. Ishtik V'nach Nafshe. Now, some interesting diak over here. Dovid HaMelech heard noise in the Bustane. It says he went out to check on it, but you notice he still was learning, because until the step broke and the noise happened, he was still concentrating. So the wind, the trees, whatever it is, he went out. He was still chazir mishnayis balpeh, whatever he was doing. And then, as he got closer, the Malach HaMavis made like he upped the ante. He made a broken step. Then he paused for a second. Ishtik V'nach Nafshe. And the Gemara tells us, Shalach Shlem L'mei Midrasha, Abba Meisa Muta B'chamo, Klavim Shabbai Saba Reiv Ma'asa My father is dead, and the son is out, and the dogs are hungry. What should I do? And the Gemara tells us that this is really a few different shaylas. It's a shayla about feeding the dogs on Shabbos, and some shayla about muktzah, about moving Dovid HaMelech. And the Bezdin paskins, something for Dovid HaMelech, something for Shlomo. And they tell him, chatech basel lefnei klavim, and take a kikar v'tinik and move Dovid HaMelech. This is what the Gemara tells us. Now, Stam, it's interesting is that this Gemara seems to be a shayla about muktzah, moving David. The Gemara later on in Shabbos tells us that muktzah was only established by Nehemiah, which is the beginning of Bayis Sheni. Dovid HaMelech is 500 years before that. So it's fascinating, why is muktzah being discussed over here? And from here, the Achronim, the Rav Shulchan Aruch, and others point out that obviously muktzah predates Nehemiah, and it's interesting that there's actually a very halachic outcome of this Gemara. This is Dovid HaMelech's P'tir, and it's on Shabbos. Now, what's interesting is our Gemara sounds like Dovid HaMelech died on Shabbos, very clearly, right? Very specifically on Shabbos. The Yerushalmi, on the other hand, gives a different day for David's death. The Yerushalmi, and Taisus brings this down in Chagiga and the Fidzayim and Beis. The Yerushalmi says like this: Afat Tzeres Yeshet Tashlumin. Taisus be Yerushalmi, and the Yerushalmi is in two places, I believe. Amar Rav Yesi bar Bun. David meis ba'atzeres. David died on Shavuos. Vayikol Yisrael einanin, and everyone was an einin. Ve'krivu l'machar, and they were able to bring their kabbanas tomorrow. K'leimar nehasa mashma shahayle tashlumin. So the Yerushalmi is bringing from the story of David HaMelech a raya that karbanos of Shavuos have tashlumin. The Gemara in Chagig is discussing if there's tashlumin days, if a person wasn't able or didn't bring his karbanos on Shavuos, could he be mashlum them? And the Gemara brings its makairis. Taisus brings the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi says that David HaMelech died on Shavuos and Klal Yisrael was an einin. All of them were eininim, and they brought their karbanos later on. Frekted Taisus the kashler Rav Rabbeinu Elchanan teipikle belavachile krivu b'rishon kivin shayei Shabbos kedamashim b'Shabbos perak b'madlikin. It was Shabbos already. Forget about that they were eininim. The first day of Shavuos must have been Shabbos, because it said the Gemara on Shabbos says David HaMelech died on Shabbos. So Zak Taisvis, V'shem hasam les lehachi ela polagaha. Could be there's a machlekes Bavli and Yerushalmi when David HaMelech died. Did David HaMelech die on Shabbos or did he die on Shavuos? So Zak Taisvis. Taisvis says could be it's a machlekes. Now the Haggais of Lezma Shaharowitz in the back of the Gemara over here on Chagiga, he says, and he brings rayas, and it's again very very Talmud Chachamdik. He brings rayas that the Yerushalmi sometimes refers to Yom Tif as Shabbos. Yerushalmi doesn't always go into details what Shabbos it is. It could just be Yom Tif. Like it could be Mayid, could be called Shabbos. It could be Atzeres, was referred to as Shabbos. This is what he tries to miyashav it. Others disagree with him, the Chidah, others disagree with him, but it seems like at face value, there's a machlekes between the Bavli and the Yerushalmi when he died. Now, the Zayar in, I forgot where it is, but the same Zayar that talks about Moshe Rabbeinu dying on Shabbos and Yosef HaTzadik dying on Shabbos, it says 3 of Klal Yisrael's greatest parnasim died on Shabbos: David, Yosef, and Moshe. And the Zayar says that David HaMelech died on Shabbos Shehi Atzeres, on a Shabbos that was Atzeres. It's like, L'kayim Shneim. It was Shabbos Shavuos, not like this year because it has to be the first day because it's before. But this is the what the Yerushalmi says. Now the Zayar Grada, what the Zayar says. Now the Zayar Grada says, it ends off. It's a Zayar in Shemai somewhere that says it's Tzrichu Kulu L'Tzidka Leila Kadosh Baruch Hu. We all have to say Tzidka Hadin on Shabbos by Mincha, which is what we do. We say Tzidkascha Ba'arach Shabbata V'Hainu Tzidkascha K'Harayel B'Shata Demis Moshe is Chashach Shimshe B'Tahara. When Moshe Rabbeinu died, it's like the sunset. V'Inalis Teresh B'Chsav Nahira Das Baklari the Nahara, and the Teresh B'Chsav, the bright light of Kadosh Baruch Hu Das Baklari, was closed down. B'Shaita Demis David Malka. When David HaMelech died, Kinishta Sierra Nuhurasa. It's like the moon extinguished its light, which is fascinating because we know that by Kiddush HaChodesh, David HaMelech Yisrael Chai V'Kayam, right? And the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah and Daf Chafei tells us that that's a remez to Kiddush HaChodesh. So David is referred to as the moon. And what? Vayraisa the Balpeh Kinishta Nuhura. And the Torah Shabal Peh got dulled. And from that moment on is when the Chachamim lost the clarity of Sai Teresh B'Chsav and Sai Teresh B'Peh, and Machlokes started being very common. The Kulu Tkifa Liba B'Arvovya. And then the Mele we say Tzidkascha. Now what's interesting is Stam, from the Zayar, it sounds like they died at the same time. Now Moshe Rabbeinu Gebracht and other sources died Mincha time, which is why we say Tzidkascha Mincha time, right? Meaning these deaths seem to have Mincha time on Shabbos. With Shlomo HaMelech asking the Shaila, he says the sun is out. He says my father's dead, the sun is bright, and the dogs are hungry. Right? Those are the 3 information tidbits that Shlomo HaMelech shares in the Gemara. Now it seems like it's maybe a different time of day, and Sasemis talks about this. And it's not interesting. There's a lot of tumbling now. But the main question over here that needs to be discussed is this part of the theory about the Bavli and Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi seems like he died in Atzeres, he died in Shavuos. The Gemara in Shabbos seems like he died in Shabbos. Tosfos, Rabbeinu Elchanan, does not seem nachas to say that that's the same thing. Tosfos says it's a stira. And the Zohar seems to say that maybe it could be the same. So what's the shmuz there? So there's an interesting thing. I'm not going to go into this in detail now. It's not really today's shmuz. We really should cover it at a different time because there are lots of calendar fights. But Mivei Sindach, that as follows, really, Shabbos, Shavuos cannot fall out on Shabbos. First day Shavuos can't fall out on Shabbos, the way our calendar has it. We have a few rules, right? Lo Yadu Rosh is the most famous one. Aleph, Dalet, and Vav is not Rosh Hashanah. And then there's V'loi Bedu Pesach. The V'loi Bedu Pesach prevents the first day of Shavuos from falling out on a Shabbos. So according to the Cheshbonis that we follow, which is from Shmuel HaKatan, who codified it Lamaisa, it can't really fall out on this. Now there's a Machlekes Rashi and Taisus and Psachim and I think Memches, if Bizman that they were Mekadesh al Piriya, did these kolam apply or not? When Bezdin's Mekadesh Riyah, did it apply or not? But the truth is that there's really a much more Yisayistic Machlekes Rishonim that goes back before that I want to just briefly sample that L'chaira has to do with what we're seeing over here. There's a major Machlekes Rishonim, call it, let's say, three camps. There's Rav Sadia Gaon, Rabbeinu Chananel, and together with him Rabbeinu Bachai and others who hold that always, since Moshe Rabbeinu's time, when Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu Kaddish, Kiddush HaChodesh, he gave him the Seder Hadvarim, he gave him the Cheshbonis, he gave him the calculations that we still have today that our calendar is formed on, and there was nothing to do with Bezdin. The whole Ra'u Bezdin, the whole Masechtas Rosh Hashanah didn't exist. It wasn't Negeya yet. It became Negeya at a particular tkuf in history, particular time when it started, and then it also went away at a particular time, and we went back to the Cheshbon. But all along, it was always following the Cheshbon. This is Rabbeinu Chananel and Rav Sadia Gaon hold. Rav Sadia Gaon holds this, it makes big nafkaminas and stuff, but that's what they hold. Now, there's other Rishonim that argue in them. The Rambam, I think the Rambam is the leader of the other tzad. I'm just trying to think who else it is, but the Rambam and others are chaylik, and they say no. Originally, Kiddush HaChodesh was given Ayidei Bezdin, with Riyah, with Eidim. That's how it was, that's how it needed to be. At a certain point, when we lost that, and Klai Yisrael went to Galus, so someone, Shmuel HaKatan, stood up and he was Mesader Cheshbon, or Hillel was Mesader Cheshbon, and he prepared, the Seder for Klai Yisrael. Now, I just want to read you what it's really from the Rabbeinu Bachai quotes Rabbeinu Chananel al Torah, who's really quoting Rav Sadia Gaon. I just want to read it because I think most people wouldn't think this. He says as follows. He says, Kach nagu Yisrael elef u'mei shana mi Moshe Rabbeinu v'ad antignis rosh goylev rosh Sanhedrin. This cheshbon that we use to Mekadesh HaChodesh to know when it's going to be, lo yadu rosh and a moiled zakin and whatever the 4 or 5 rules. It's 4 rules I think that there are to establish a calculation, and it's a 27-year cycle. Whatever the whole cheshbon that it is, this is a cheshbon that Klai Yisrael used for 1,500 years from Moshe Rabbeinu until antignis sheichei rosh goylev rosh Sanhedrin. Shahayu b'chlal tamidav shnayim. He had 2 bad apples amongst his talmidim. Vehem tzadik u'baisis. The tzdukim and the baisusim. He had tzadik u'baisis. Ucheshadar shlem altiu kavadim m'shamshin etzerav v'manas lekabel pras nichna safek believing v'chaj v'shein scharav le'yonish. And we know it's from Pirkei Avos, right? Meaning they at some point thought that the core message of antignish sheichel altiu kavadim m'shamshin etzerav v'manas lekabel pras means that there's no scharav le'yonish. They became not from the yatzul atarbas. They went off the derech. Lefisha hayu chachmei Yisrael shleimim b'chachmas eibur. Since the Chachmei Yisrael were shleimustik in Chachmas Eibur, v'hoisa Chachma Mfueres Hahi Mekubelas Atzlam, they knew it. Hischilu Talmidim Achaserim Haim Lifrik Me'aleim Chachmas Hakabalu Pirush HaMitzvahs. The Iru B'Kviyas HaChadashim. Since this was like some sort of secret wisdom that the Chachamim had, so people who now became in vogue to question the Chachamim and to say, maybe the Chachamim don't really know what they're talking about, so maybe they're just making it up. Like they decide this month, that month, then maybe there's no real calculation to this. So v'hotzruchu chachmei adar lahakrish devreim b'rayis gmuris v'amrav gamliel atachushel l'riyas ha'yirech. He brings rayis and just Melech made a whole pumbi, a whole bezdin, a whole situation with Edim coming in charts and graphs. And the Gemara tells us Gamliel had models in his. They took this ancient science out of the closet, they laid it out on the table, laid it bare for everybody to see, said everybody could participate. Eidim, Ahin, this is how the Rabbeinu Chananel, Rav Sadia Gaon, Rabbeinu Bachai, many Rishonim learned. So according to them, the cheshbon, it was always done al pi cheshbon. Now if that's true that it was always done al pi cheshbon, then it's kind of hard to shtim the Bavli and Yerushalmi, and you have to say like Tosfos says, that there's a machlokes, there's 2 days and it couldn't be Shavuos. But according to the Rambam and the others who are chaylik on this and say that no, Klai Yisrael always did it al pi Riyah. And only when they went into Galus and they were losing the ability to have a Bezdin did they invent or codify a calendar. So then it's possible to understand that Shavuos at those days during Daven Melch's time could have fallen on Shabbos. Now, I'm not going to go into this, but there are probably more than 10 Gemaras that discuss Shilas of a Yom Tif that fell out, Pesach Shechal, but whatever, or this Shechal, probably more than 10 Gemaras that cannot exist, according to our Cheshbainis. And Rabbeinu Chanan Sadigan knew these Gemaras too, and they discussed them, and it's a huge tumult and mevucha. Maybe one day we'll talk about, maybe one day we'll do a small series on Rav Sadia Gaon's calendar innovations. It's very interesting stuff. But Yirshia, this is a great Machik Rishonim. This Machik Rishonim is what this Nidin of how to know when Dovid HaMelech was Niftal L'maisa hinges on. Akapanim Yirshia, the Messiah is from the Zayar and from the Yerushalmi that Dovid HaMelech was Niftal on Shavuos. So Memela, Dovid HaMelech was born on Shavuos. So it's the day of his birthday, the day of his yahrzeit. Mele we read Parshas Ros to commemorate that. Good Yom Tov, to be continued.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.